Welcome back. It's good to be with you, and I hope you're learning something from these videos. I love the feedback, I love criticism, and I like hearing the good stuff as well too. So keep it coming, I appreciate it. I was recently on a call with a group of sharp people from Adrian's office in Ohio, and Jay Zook asks a question. He goes, where do you start with good finances? And so I always appreciate that question. I find a lot of leaders ask a lot of good questions when it comes to money, and rightfully so. I think I have a couple thoughts with why is it good to really talk about money? Well, first of all, there's no way of escaping money. I mean, your entire life, you are going to be dealing with money, okay? You're going to have a relationship with money. It might as well be a good relationship. You don't want a bad relationship with money. As an example, with my 13-year-old, right? He's growing up and, we're talking about all kinds of stuff. I'm like, interest is either going to be a positive word for you or it's going to be a negative word for you. If interest is a positive word, you'll have money making money, right? So every year on his birthday, whatever he has saved up, he gets 10%, combined with myself and Wells Fargo, we give him 10% interest on his money. It's like 9.9% me and 0.1% Wells Fargo. And so interest has been a positive word thus far for him. So he likes the word interest. But as he's growing up, I'm like, well, listen, interest isn't always such a pleasant thing. Imagine this, you've accumulated $100,000 worth of student loans. You're making payments for 10 years on these student loans. You're making the minimum payments, and after 10 years, you owe $110,000. And well, that doesn't make any sense. How can you owe more than what you borrowed? I'm like, well, listen, you're going to have a relationship with money, and in that case, interest is going to be a bad thing, right? If you're paying interest on debt, but if you're getting interest on investments, it's a good thing. So again, my first thought is you want to have a really good relationship with money. So I think money questions are great questions to have because your entire life you'll be dealing with money. And number two, there's a lot of stress and risk involved for people coming into our business to work on commissions. I know for me, as a youngster, my first job, I was 12 years old. And I was scratching my head because I got paid on an hourly wage. I got paid $4 per hour. And I thought it was unfair. Again, the initial thought was unfair of why would my boss pay people different wages for different kind of work? Like if I'm doing twice as much work, shouldn't I get twice as much pay? I was kind of hoping that would be the answer. And I remember just kind of learning on, trading time for dollars. And I'm like, well, it doesn't make sense. It should be the quality of work. And so that might have been the first seed of Jamie, you might like commissions as you get older. So I know when I got involved in the business, I kind of had an inclination, I'm going to like performance-based pay, but it was terrifying for me because my first thought was, what if I suck at this? If I suck at this, listen, I've got a certain amount of expenses to pay and, I'm going to go bankrupt here if I'm not careful. So there's risk, there's concern, there's, reason to pause. And so I think the questions that Jay is asking and a lot of leaders around the country, how can I be good with my finances? Where does good finances start? So let's dive into this together. So I'd like to start with some basic economics that I'm assuming everybody already knows. Let's just define profit. What exactly is profit? Well, profit equals your revenue minus your expenses, right? So that gap between the two is your profit. Just like, how do you define loss? Well, a loss is your revenue minus your expenses, right? The expenses are exceeding the revenue, so that gap there is the loss. So obviously the starting point with good finances is, hey, listen, we want to be profitable, right? Just like every business in America, wants to be profitable. But I've found that, listen, if you have consistent profit, if you can consistently live in this world, that the revenue is exceeding the expenses, and you got, profit consistency, it equals choices. Consistent profit equals choices. Choices on where to invest your money, choices on being able to spend on potentially some luxury goods. So let's just start with that. That is really the goal, is to be profitable. When you're thinking of good finances, let's have the intent, let's have the end in mind here. We want to be profitable. Revenues got to exceed expenses. In the world of maximizing profits, let's first take a look at expenses. How much does it really cost to keep you alive? Like, how are you keeping track of the money going out? Now, I think there's a lot of great ways. I'm sure there's got to be a bunch of apps, and I'm sure many of you have the apps. Like, oh, dude, I've got this app. It totally keeps track of everything in my life as far as money going out, and it itemizes it for me, shows me a little pie chart on, I'm spending this percentage on rent and this percentage on gas and this percentage on, meals and entertainment. I'm sure there's apps, so do your due diligence. I'm old school and I just keep a bank ledger. But I know to the penny, if you were to ask me right now, Jamie, how much do you have in the bank? I could tell you to the penny how much is in the bank, right? I'm keeping track of every expense. And I want to look at those expenses and just truly understand, how much does it cost to keep me alive? How much am I really spending? And I think a lot of people underestimate what they spend. They underestimate. They overestimate how much they make, and they underestimate how much they spend. Then in the world of profit, they're like, oh, geez, this isn't a profit, this is a loss. So let's really start by taking a really good look at the money going out and have tools in place on how you're keeping track of the money coming out. Once I have my tool in place, I can keep track of the money coming out. Just like if your goal is weight loss or physical fitness, there's a tool called a scale that you're going to hop on every time you show up, right? You need some kind of measurement tool to keep track. So I've got my tool, I've got my ledger, or I've got my app, and I'm keeping track of all the money going out. Now, the goal in the world of expenses is to drive that sucker down, bring expenses down. I know we want to ultimately bring our expenses up. We want to live a great life. I understand your expenses are going to go up as you make more money. But while you're in the position that you're in, are there things you can do to reduce your costs? Now, I know that there's fixed expenses, your rent is probably going to be the same. Although, hey, could I move? Could I have another roommate come in or something? There are things you can do with your fixed expenses. There are also things you can do with your variable expenses, right? Like, the monthly recurring charges. Think of those MRCs that we all have to pay. I'll give you a quick example. The other day, last I looked at Netflix. I remember when I first signed up with Netflix, I think it was like $7.99 a month. It was like nothing, right? Didn't think much of it, didn't know the details in it. Time goes on, and I just saw that MRC on my credit card of like $19.99. I'm like, 19? How did I go from $7.99 to $19.99? Just decided to look into the details because, again, I want to reduce, I want to eliminate MRCs if I can. I'll get to another story here in a second. But just on this Netflix thing, I look at the details. I'm like, oh, there's a bunch of different options with Netflix that I didn't know. You can get the high def if you want. I'm like, I don't want to watch in standard. I want the high def. Yes, but do I need at the high def, they had two options. One was $19.99 for unlimited devices, with your account. For $15.99, however, you can stream on 2 devices in your household. And I'm like, well, we're never streaming more than 1 device. Like, I don't need the $19.99 feature. I want the high def feature. I'm going to pay $15.99. So that might not sound like a big deal, like, oh, Hep's saving $4. Welcome to a cup of coffee at Starbucks, is what he's saving per month. But a penny saved is a penny earned. You got to respect money. You work so hard for it, you got to respect it. And if there are things you can do to bring those expenses down, you do so. So I just recently saved $4 a month by looking at the details of Netflix. When I was a rep, right, I'm like, gee, I got to bring my, my clothing costs down. And somebody told me, Jamie, go to Ross Dress for Less. And I remember coming into work on a Monday, and I'm like, hey guys, look at me. Oh, Jamie's got a new shirt on. I'm like, yep, look, Ralph Lauren. Now the little horsey's down on the belly, right? It's a somewhat of a knockoff, or it was a bad batch of shirts that they made with the horse in the wrong spot. But hey, for $5, hey guys, I'm sporting a Ralph Lauren. This is pretty awesome. Save money. The other day, again, monthly recurring charges. What can you do to eliminate, to reduce monthly recurring charges, bringing those costs down? I called Verizon, right? I start off with prompt 1. I'm talking to a live rep. I've been a Verizon customer for, I don't know how long, 20 years or something like that. I mean, every month there's a charge. It adds up over time. And I said, is there a dollar amount I could pay where I never have to get a bill anymore? Like I heard through the grapevine that American Airlines has this option that you pay some kind of astronomical number and you basically now fly for the rest of your life. You've got a first class ticket. I think it might be a pretty huge number. I really haven't looked into it, but I did want to look into the Verizon stuff. I'm like, there's got to be a number that I pay. Is it $10,000? Is it $15,000? How much can I pay where I never have a monthly recurring charge? Oh, that's an odd question. Let me transfer you to somebody else. Go from prompt 1 to prompt 2. Oh, that's an interesting question. Let me transfer you to somebody else. I don't know how many levels I went up. It was a long call. I finally got to somebody who could really answer the question, and basically they told me, yeah, that doesn't exist. We always want to tap your credit card on a monthly basis to get that charge from you. There is no fee. But again, in the spirit of I want to reduce monthly recurring charges, or I want to eliminate monthly recurring charges. Think about it. If you've got student loans, if you didn't have to make that payment anymore and that was just gone, well, man, you've really reduced your cost of living. So drive yourself a little nuts. It's worth some quadrant 2 time, not urgent, but important, right? Quadrant 2 time, that you take some time on a monthly basis to just kind of pause, ask yourself, okay, how much is it really costing to keep me alive? Are there things I can do to reduce those costs? That's really step 1 in really having great finances and being a good steward of your money. All right, Jamie, I've got my expenses under control. I'm doing things to drive my costs down. Okay, let's talk about the fun stuff. How do I make more money? So I want to have that spread for profit, right? I want higher revenue, got expenses. And ultimately, I know you want higher expenses. You want a better life and it's going to cost you more. I get that. But let's make sure that spread is always there. So let's drive revenue. What can I do to drive revenue? And I remember early on as a new rep, I joined the business and my dad's curious because all I've ever known is hourly wages, and I had some gripes about that. Like, why would my boss pay the same wage when it's different quality work? So he was curious, how's Jamie doing in this commission environment? And I remember telling him the analogy I came up with. I'm like, Dad, it's like a faucet, right? I have the control of the faucet. If I want the water to gush, I can turn it on and just the water's gushing. I can work harder, I can put in longer hours, I can study more, but I have control of the money. I'm like, this is wonderful. And this was before I became a consistent high performer. I just really love that concept. If the water's dripping, well then I must have done something to tighten it up. And again, if I want to loosen it up, I have the power to loosen it up. So what can you do to have the faucet running here? So I would just say this, I'm like, ask the question, are there people on your program that are hitting the ball out of the park consistently? Not just every now and then on a blue moon, they're hitting the ball out of the park. No, I want to know consistently, are there reps that are making $2,000 a week? When I log into Salesforce, the answer is yes. On every program, there are high-performing reps that consistently perform at a level of pacing for $100,000 or more per year. The question is, are you the student knocking on that person's door? As a low roller, I never had a high roller knock on my door to say, hey, Jamie, I've noticed you kind of suck. Maybe you should start following me. Maybe you should listen to me. Maybe you should, come into the field with me and really pay attention to what I'm doing. Like, no, they weren't knocking on my door. It's my responsibility. I ask my kids all the time, I'm like, to get good grades, whose responsibility is it? Is it the teacher's responsibility to teach you? Or is it the student's responsibility to learn? And if you didn't quite get it, you ask the teacher more questions. And so the answer is yes, it's the student. When the student is ready, the teachers will appear. So when you're really ready to learn and you really want to study the pitch and you want to study the objections, the common objections that you hear in the field, study the high performers. Record the pitch. Then record your pitch and make sure that if you were to superimpose the two, you're totally on the right track. Your facial expressions are the same at the same time as the high rollers. When an objection is thrown, you respond the same, right? So it can be carbon copied. I mean, I know in school, we were always reprimanded for cheating, looking over somebody's shoulder. But in this business, we want to encourage you to look over somebody's shoulder and copycat what's working. Success leaves clues, and we want you to duplicate what the high performers are doing. So that's really the very basics, right? When you want to get good with finances, right? So I just look at it in real simple terms of like, well, profit. I want to be profitable. I want my revenue to exceed my expenses in my current state. What can I do to drive my expenses down? And what can I do to drive my revenue up? Do those things, get consistent, right? Consistent profits equal choices, and be prepared to move upstream. So that's what I have here for you, Jay. I hope you have yourself a great week.